Let me introduce quickly Anne as today's first speaker. So Anne Okerson joined the Center for Research Libraries in fall 2011 as a senior advisor on electronic strategies and has until recently served at as INASP associate, which is a great organization. She was handling contractual agreements between developing nations, consortia, and particularly large publishers. Previous services include the Associate University Librarian for Collections at Yale University, where she organized and led the NERL Consortium. Many of you know the Northeastern Research Libraries Consortium as one of the leading consortial brands in e-resources in North America. Prior to that, Anne was Scholarly Communications Officer at the Association of Research Libraries, the first to hold that position, which had then been launched. She has led the creation of 2 North American model licenses for electronic information and for 20 years has moderated the email discussion list LibLicense, which many of you, I'm sure, will read every day. Anne is one of the active founding spirits of the International Coalition of Library Consortia, ICOLC, which I always refer to as the consortium of consortia in the world, a group that meets twice a year somewhere. And I had the pleasure to be there, I think, twice. And we'll speak about trends and topics in libraries in North America. And I could not imagine a person more knowledgeable on this topic. And over to you, and thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Sven. Good morning, everyone. Let's make sure you can hear me.
Yes, it's great. Thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me. And let me start by saying good morning. It's still a little dark where I am. And thank you for joining this seminar. Everyone knows that libraries collect published materials and serve it up to users. So it is easy to talk about libraries in those terms, what we collect and what we do with it. But I want to suggest that thinking about libraries in that way is like thinking about axes in the way the farmer does in the old joke. This crusty old farmer had a favorite axe. He was so fond of it that he had replaced the head 3 times and the handle 5 times, and he planned to keep that axe forever. I'm going to suggest that libraries and the evolution of library collection is like a revised version of that joke. What I'm going to do here is review the history of library collecting in quotes, in order to get to a more accurate description of where we are, what today's challenges are, and what the opportunities might be. So I'm going to call my survey the 6 stages of librarianship. Note that each is a product of its time and of its environment. So we're going to talk about quickly the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, the Industrial Age, the Information Age, and the Machine Age. And you will notice that each age gets shorter and shorter, and the changes come faster and faster. So the Stone Age was the age before it was impossible to think of libraries. Written materials consisted of rough-made objects shaped out of clay, plant material, animal skins, handcrafted and marked with hand-applied inks and incisions. Collections of such materials were barely possible, but the first glimmerings of ambition were seen. A few dozen manuscripts made a library, a few hundred made a great library, and rarely at times that ambition reached further. We don't know much about the Library of Alexandria, but it stands at the beginning of library history as a sign for the desire for large inclusion. It was wonderful to behold and wonderful to use, and I'm sure the laptops from which we are doing this seminar could easily hold its entire contents many times over. Librarians, such as they were in the Stone Age, were hoarders and carers with whatever knowledge they could muster of organization of collections and some ambition for the next few books they wanted to find. Remember that this Stone Age lasted longer than all the other ages of literate production put together. So let's call it 500 before the Common Era to 1500 more or less, so around 2000 years. Today we are latecomers in the history of our culture. The Bronze Age was introduced by the invention of movable type, and it was like the ancient Bronze Age in that it brought a kind of mechanization that radically advanced past what was possible in the age of handwriting. Let's say this age lasted roughly from 1500 to 1800, i.e. 300 years. And these dates are all fairly loose, and my names, of course, are for these periods are quite made up by me. It was an age with real limits. As excited as we get about printing, remember that for the first 100 years after Gutenberg, people still made manuscript copies from printed books because that was the easiest form of reproduction unless you had a bulky, expensive, time-consuming mechanism of a printing press and staff nearby. But without question, printed books could move about as never before and end up in great temples of learning. The French Bibliothèque Nationale claims its founding in 1461, the Vatican Library in 1475, including manuscripts of the past, the Bodleian 1602, the British Library 1753, and the Library of Congress in the US around 1800. But there were still national libraries in Europe where you found the contents by looking in huge folio volumes in which the collection was indexed by handwritten notes. And only users who could make their way to such special places and claim the right to enter could dream of using those collections. So let's call the next age the Library Iron Age, as beginning around 1800 and running until the Great World Wars. So about 125 to 150 years long. Collections grew, more collections were built. Universities began to be places where you could find a lot of books, and dreams of better access began to come true. The first real technology tools came in the form of the card catalog and even rudimentary union catalogs. A first interlibrary loan system was imagined not far from the modern Silicon Valley in the 1800s. In 1886, Joseph Rao, librarian at the University of California, Berkeley, sought permission to begin interlibrary loan. His request was granted. During the years 1894 to 1898, he initiated Berkeley's first program of interlibrary lending with the California State Library as a partner. For the first time, where books lived was a little less important than where the book was needed, and the path to user-centric librarianship was opening. By comparison to the rest of the society, the industrial age came late to libraries, but it came with a vengeance. It is a very familiar age, the period from the earlier 1900s to about 1980 or 1990, more or less. The mid-20th century was the great age of building the giant academic libraries in the US that we have come to take for granted. Harvard and Yale got there in the 1920s or so, Princeton in the 1940s, and many other US universities were building a book-friendly facility, often in the brutalist architectural style in the 1960s. Open stacks were now common. The new Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris from the 1990s probably represented the culmination of such grand ambitions. These buildings are triumphs of industrial organization for rapid distribution and retrieval of books with increasingly standardized card catalogs all around. Libraries here began to speak casually of owning millions of items, and library associations measured library quality in part by those counts of millions. New forms of collecting ambitions came with the industrial age. The US Library of Congress opened offices beginning in 1962 in distant locations to collect output on behalf of American libraries. And it still maintains offices in Cairo, Islamabad, Jakarta, Nairobi, New Delhi, and Rio de Janeiro. In the same period, renowned booksellers like Harasowitz in Germany and Casalini in Italy became facilitators for the collecting ambitions of American libraries. drawing more and more varied collections of European materials thanks to their expertise. More millions of books accumulated in the United States. That great industrial age began to end almost before it fully began. If we had known that the great age of building such massive libraries would only last for a relatively short period, we might have proceeded more cautiously. A variety of factors, and most spectacularly perhaps the flowering of the commercial scientific journal and the explosion in publishing and the consequent explosion in costs, and many of us remember the serial pricing crisis of the 80s and 90s, accompanied the widespread availability of photocopying and rudimentary electronic computers. We slid into the information age of libraries before the end of the 20th century. Note, as I said at the beginning, each age just gets shorter and shorter. But as we saw a proliferation of bibliographers and subject specialist collections librarians in our libraries, we also began to hire IT personnel and expand interlibrary loan departments and wrestle with staffing needs for technical services to meet new demands and new tools. And then with the arrival of the digital or the machine age, the great physical libraries have started to evaporate before our eyes. The 1980s had seen the appearance of the, quote, Harvard model repository, a huge offsite facility for compact storage in optimal environmental conditions of large numbers of books infrequently used, though such offsite shelving on a smaller scale had been practiced earlier. The great library temple of learning began to be a front end for a much larger enterprise. The invasion of libraries by digital information came close at its heels. By 1990, I was meeting the first dozen or so characters who had begun publishing online journals. And my job at the Association of Research Libraries, I edited and published the first directories of such journals. The 1991 edition indexed 27 titles, a number of which still survive today. The last edition was published in 2000, by which time no printed directory could keep up. In those years, hugely digitally accessible databases of every sort began to appear. For starters, in 1992, Chadwick Healy announced publication of a digitized version of Patrologia Latina, a standard 225-volume 19th century reference work for medievalists. And so they blazed the trail wide open for commercial firms to digitize public domain material and make these once again a source of revenue. The appearance of JSTOR in 1995 was financially manageable, and in retrospect, JSTOR truly marked a moment in the dematerialization of the physical library as researchers began to enjoy great speed and convenience of access more than ever before. So this is our world now. Knowledge proliferates, formats proliferate, findings proliferate, and note that everything that came before remains even as the new is added, and users want access to everything. We are at a point which the pandemic has emphasized that what we think of as library is far, far less connected to physical buildings than at any time since 500 before the Common Era. So now here's a portrait of today's collections librarians and their concerns. We are not robots, or not yet. In Europe and the US, library selection of mostly printed formats was performed largely by faculty until the mid-1900s or later, when there was a shift to library selection. As late as the 1980s, Princeton held off converting one section of its collections to Library of Congress cataloging in order to placate an elderly faculty member happily at work selecting for them in an important discipline. But then the project became more businesslike. 1977 is the very first time we find the term collection development used at the American Library Association's Midsummer Conference in Detroit. The higher level concept of collection management, which was added to collections librarians in 1980s, and it signaled librarians' active role not just in selection, but in the entire life cycle of the chosen items. Initially, the function of the selector or bibliographer was in the back office, kept separate from reference librarians who dealt with patrons. The two functions started to come together in the 1990s as the concept of subject specialists gave way to an emphasis on liaison roles with a broad range of responsibilities and services to library users. These changes reflected how complicated the information world was becoming and how much the librarian as a navigating intermediary could add. Where public services in a library had once been an entirely different division of staff and function, now the back and public-facing services came together. And librarians started to become partners, working with faculty and students and the programs involved. Meanwhile, mechanization advanced as well. Vendors introduced approval plans whereby they would deliver to the library everything that fit a particular profile the library had defined. And the idea was that much of the collecting business could be done without title-by-title selection. One more critical change occurred in these years, and it was a waterfall in the 1990s, the shift from purchase to license as the model of acquisition. Digital resources typically require or benefit from continued attention and delivery from the vendor, and that was the basis for a whole change in the business model. Where the librarian of 1900 or 1950 or 19 whatever bought a book and the publisher never knew what became of it, the librarian of 2000 to today licenses a book or a journal which never leaves the publisher's servers, and it's used according to strict rules laid down by the publisher and whose use is carefully tracked by that publisher. The implications of this shift are vast and not really my topic today, but we have to keep it in mind. Taken forward, all those developments create a world in which libraries find themselves expected to collect or access everything of use to their communities. Our users care about where something resides or who paid for it much less than librarians must, as long as they can get it. OCLC's Lorcan Dempsey famously speaks of a library's external collection, a useful frame for thinking about the facilitated network of resources that come to us from many directions. Libraries have locally owned and sometimes locally produced materials, but we also have what we have licensed from external sources, what we borrow from others, what may reside in a shared print collection or a shared digital collection, and especially what resides in open access sources of one kind or another. Locally produced items, moreover, increasingly include not just digital versions of libraries' archival collections or faculty articles in a repository, but now increasingly data sets, and sometimes very large data sets, created by faculty and curated by the library. As for open access materials, we never acquired them in the first place, and we certainly didn't pay for them, but shouldn't they be in our catalog as a discovery tool that increasingly points beyond what we can in any meaningful way say that we possess? Of course, even materials that are available everywhere have to reside somewhere, and the mountain of analog material we possess collectively, the result of that boom of the age of mid-century modern, poses its own challenges. What do we house in our on-site buildings? What goes in off-site storage? Oh, and that offsite storage in ideal environmental conditions. The Harvard Model Repository buildings cost a lot to maintain. Will the materials stored offsite be used so often that a chief financial officer in a university 10 or 20 years from now will think that they are the best way to spend money? That pressure isn't really here yet, but I do promise you it is coming. One important trend that began as information began to be produced ever more rapidly and in abundance is development of cooperation in matters of collections. This movement has produced a mixed bag of results. From the 1980s, we had a preoccupation with cooperative preservation, leading to a lot of fund investment and a lot of microfilming, cooperative microfilming. At the same time, increasing effort was spent on cooperative collection development on the basis that perhaps responsibility for certain subjects, particularly of specialty or low-use items, could be shared among a group of libraries. That has had varied success over time, but the process persists, and I think possibly more successfully. Today's forays into more systematic print cooperation will bear fruit as we rationalize the number of copies of books and journals that are held locally, regionally, and nationally. And I'm just going to give you a couple of URL examples for your follow-up when you have a chance. I think these are projects well worth looking at. Other recent coalitions are digital, and they have had much more immediate success. The growth of library consortia as bulk buyers on behalf of libraries looking to license expensive resources has been the big story of the last 20 years, and a big success story. And in terms of cooperatively built collections, I'll simply note Hathi Trust, founded in 2008 to be the holding home for digital books created by the great Google Book Scanning Project, has been remarkably successful in eliminating duplicated effort and creating a digital resource that all its members can draw upon. A moment on open access, about which you heard a great deal very cogently yesterday from Dirk. Persistent is the long-term passionate commitment of librarians and growing segments of society to advancing the cause of open access. Open access has emerged today as a mission-driven commitment to making curated, high-quality scholarship available to the entire global population without paywalls. This is inevitably a complicated economic and business question, and one we have wrestled with for 25 years and more, since cognitive scientist Stephen Harnad emerged as the prophet of a different kind of information economy. Unfunded mandates, usually without teeth for enforcement, have encouraged academics to seek open access outlets for at least a decade, and momentum has been gained in at least two ways in the last decade. First of all, publishers have found ways to make material openly accessible by charging article processing charges, or APCs, upfront to researchers or their funders, and probably more successfully, new publishers have emerged committed to open as a founding principle. So Hindawi in 1997, Biomed Central 2000 plus 2003, etc. The Plan S coalition of funders in Europe has added more impetus to this movement, while other initiatives in reaction or as creations, such as Knowledge Unlatched, Reveal Digital, Scope 3, Open Library of the Humanities, and so on, have found very important niches in the distribution of good science and scholarship. By the way, August 14, 1991 is the stated founding date of Archive, a free distribution service of e-prints and an open access archive for 1.8 million scholarly articles in the fields of physical and related sciences. Collections librarians today have fresh and additional preoccupation. So here's a selection of hot buttons that affect our work in various ways. At a macro level, we are concerned about the implicit question of just what a library needs to own and what it can forego ownership on if it has assured access. These conversations naturally lead to very recent discussions of a new service called controlled digital lending to make the so far undigitized past available to readers in a way that is compatible with copyright. Various US libraries are pursuing CDL, but it is the Internet Archive that has recently drawn a publisher-driven lawsuit to test it. Librarians are closely watching that space, especially in COVID time when the archive and also HathiTrust and some others have offered emergency access to print materials they hold by scanning and making digital copies available on a very restricted basis. At the same time, and related to those conversations, much attention now goes to foregrounding our archives and special collections. This involves digitization, curation, and publicity for collections that in the past were not made as accessible as they should be. And our work on data curation, particularly but not exclusively, has given libraries a new preoccupation with computational analysis, data science, distant reading, text and data mining, and other ways of using technology to read faster, further, and better than the human eye can go. Especially in COVID times, as everyone faces unprecedented economic changes, can we afford to meet our ambitions and visions and demands? What has become of collections budgets? So here's a rough historical typology. In the post-war boom years, libraries were everybody's darlings. New institutions were created. Old institutions were finding new ambitions. The dollar was strong in the trend-setting US, and money flowed. Starting with the Nixon shock devaluation of the dollar in 1971 and accelerating through the oil embargo and stagflation of the 70s, increasing pressure developed for constraining, canceling, cutting, and sharing resources. In spite of that, and with the documented loss of buying power in the 1980s, the new library economy, which was centered on expensive journals, survived, and it avoided any real pressure to change business models. The 1990s and 2000s were better years for G20 economies, and we got by. The recession of 2008 stunned us. Buying power remained level at very best. Until now, in COVID time, we genuinely do not know what will come next. What can be said is that the great age when library materials budgets were thought to be a critical component of research and teaching success and institutional prestige are over. We now fight for every dollar. Last month, the International Coalition of Library Consortia, ICOLC, did an informal survey, and they asked 60 leaders to agree or disagree with the following statements. And bear in mind that these are not 60 library directors. They're leaders of consortia whose members can comprise anywhere from 10 to 20 libraries up to several hundred or nationwide. So that's the context for these questions. These are impressionistic answers. They are not a scientifically valid survey, but I think important. So in the first four questions, we said, are university-wide budget cuts likely? And the mean answer, the average answer, was 4.35 out of 5, yes. Budgets dedicated to bibliographic purchases will be negatively affected. The mean answer was 4.16 out of 5, so very high. Cuts in library staff, likely, not quite so much. Average answer was 3.67 yes out of 5. And publishers will voluntarily freeze price increases, not so much. the mean was 2.69 out of possible 5. We asked 4 other questions at the consortial level. My consortium has or will cancel some resources for budget reasons. The answer was yes, 40%. My consortium has or will make requests for publisher reduction in prices. The answer was 70% yes. My consortium has made or will make requests for flat rates with no price increases. 90% yes on that. And my consortium has asked or will ask publishers for other types of reductions, not necessarily in money, so like more content, more back files, APC discounts, etc. And that was a 48% yes. So already there are reports of sudden budget cuts in academic libraries as high as 10 to 20%. And the situation remains volatile as our institutions watch enrollments and costs through the crisis. Particularly concerning is the trend in international enrollments, which has been a cash cow for many American institutions since foreign students pay full fare and domestic students may not. Numbers of international students had peaked and slightly declined recently, due in part to political complications, and bans on travel of the last year have added huge downward pressure. Future of academic libraries depends on the future of higher education in America, and librarians are watching for prospective shakeouts as nervously as anyone. Demand for print books in academic libraries is sagging further as we realize that institutions these days can provide their best services when as many resources as possible are available digitally. Cutting big deals and approval plans are places to look for savings, and that work is proceeding. And what we see most is hunkering down, caution, and careful inching forward. And one more pressure, librarians and libraries are praiseworthy homes of concern for fairness, equity, and inclusion in many ways. What we collect, where it comes from, whose stories our collections tell, who our readers are, these questions have always mattered to libraries. But a renewed commitment to inclusion and anti-racism inevitably becomes an added factor in decisions about resource allocations. So here's a quick slide summarizing pandemic effects on budgets. There has been the inability to process books because of fear of the virus, and not having staff on site, of course, has reduced ordering still further. Cancellations are proceeding because budget projections are dismal. Big deals are starting to gradually erode, even though they may persist. The packages may be more limited, certain terms may be reduced. Book approval plans are being reviewed. Open access in the US, transformative agreements are not as prevalent in the US as in Europe. That's because simply, I think it takes a whole lot of effort in the back rooms with spreadsheets and data to develop a successful transformative agreement. Dirk yesterday mentioned a few institutions in the US who have been active on this front. I think the University of Iowa, MIT, he mentioned the California Digital Library. He asked how many institutions that covers. It's 10. So the level of activity in the US on transformative agreements at the moment is not significant, I don't think. But the CDL activities are highly, highly visible. There does appear to be some investment in this country for open access. If presented with an open access possibility to contribute, as in things like Subscribe to Open, libraries are actually interested in those and may find the funds. Overall, there's some innovation, but libraries have switched to essential services, and we are hunkering down on significant decisions. I hope I've described libraries, and for sure academic libraries, as creatures of our times and as a colossally ambitious and complicated mechanism to maintain and carry forward these days in a time of high expectation, great change, and uncertainty in a number of fronts. Where does that leave us? I've given you a lot of context. I don't have a lot of answers, if any. I want to emphasize just how far we all have come together and how little of what we do today in collections resembles anything that librarians were doing, even back when baby boomers first went off to college. Think of the main lines of change: print to digital, local to regional, to national, maybe even global collections, rethinking all of our services and staff, the inclusion of hugely diverse communities of knowledge and practice, while resources are increasingly constrained. So seeing afresh what our opportunities are, which may not be easy, and not just obsessing about how we manage to meet former expectations, that is very difficult for anybody and harder than ever for everybody in 2020. For a Frankfurt convening like this, and Frankfurt historically has done more to bring publishers, authors, readers, and libraries together than almost any other force in the world, we must urge one another to look beyond our immediate needs and to think creatively together about the possibilities. So those are my thoughts for today.
Thank you very much, Anne. That's a wealth of information and also of perspectives after a very long career in libraries. I have one question for you, which comes directly to my mind looking at what you have said about libraries and publishers. You hardly mentioned intermediaries in your talk. Why is that? Do you think they don't really have an active role in today's library world, or do you think they are just there and you take them for granted?
By intermediaries, you are referring to
booksellers, journal agents, and all kinds of technology providers that are kind of in the space, if you want, between publishers and libraries.
Well, I apologize if I didn't give enough credit where credit is due. I do think that I did mention the role of, it was an example of two renowned intermediaries, booksellers, in helping to build U.S. foreign collections. And I could have listed a whole lot more. The approval plans that I mentioned are all made possible by vendors. It is vendors. I think Blackwell was the first one in the U.S., probably in the late 60s or so, who came out with an approval plan and really transformed the way in which backroom selectors did their work and stopped. I have this picture in my mind, and it's still very real. When I first came to Yale in 1996, of a bibliography department where really smart, hardworking PhD subject specialist librarians were poring over book dealers' catalogs from all over the world and just surrounded by paper and making these diligent choices. This could never have happened without the entire book-selling community. We have everything to thank them for, at least for the growth in the fabulous printed collections that are a hallmark of academic libraries today. Intermediaries in the digital age, well, of course, in addition to publishers who have taken on their own digital distribution, we have intermediaries, such as Knowledge Unlatched. We have intermediaries like Muse and JSTOR, aggregators, who again have made it possible for us to deliver this kind of information to our readers. So otherwise, it couldn't be done without creating them.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Here's one question from Helen, I guess. I hope that is pronounced correctly. She'd be interested in knowing why you believe that open access is less prevalent in the US than in Europe. What might be the reasons for that from your perspective?
I think a lot of it is the decentralized nature of the US. Big country, 330 million people, a kind of long tradition of, and not quite laissez-faire, but less direction from the very, very top, except through agencies like the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, those organizations, the Department of Energy. Those organizations have actually been able to fund and to also make some rules that go with that funding. But otherwise, in the US, a lot of the decision-making and action devolves to the states. And also the way that consortia have grown up in the US has followed that model. So, the first big US consortium was probably in the late 80s. Tom Sandville organizing Ohio Link. And from that, we see the regional consortia arise, the state consortia, So all of this happens not in silos because we all talk to each other, but it happens independently. One of my frustrations is that I can see some of the same work going on in these different US consortia as we deal with publishers and so on. But that's where we are. We're very decentralized, and most of the funding is not centralized. So we do get huge tranches of funding from a few main foundations and organizations. A lot of the rest of it is local and regional, and so there just isn't the coherence of policy that you can see in a country like the UK or maybe even Germany, Finland, Norway, etc.
Okay, I see here in the chat that some people are starting to whisper, which is really good. So Jody and Helen are exchanging their views, which is great. So Jody is just adding to this. In my experience, it has much to do with the institutional culture. And I think that's true. You mentioned Iowa State, for example, earlier, and California Digital Library. I think it's really interesting to see that there are institutions that lead by example and others basically follow them. But it's also true in my experience that collective action is in some cases more difficult in the US as a huge country with very different sizes of libraries than it is in European countries where libraries are probably a little bit closer in size to each other than they are in the US.
Well, I was just going to say that all academic institutions and their leadership, their presidents, their executive officers have a number of issues they're dealing with at the same time. And at the institutional level, without a lot of impetus from throughout the campus, open access just hasn't risen to the top like cream as some other issues have. But that again it's a bit of the institutional culture, but it's also the very distributed nature of power and policy and funding in the US.
Yeah. Okay, here's another question to your last points about the pandemic and these very interesting numbers that you shared from ICORC. Jen is asking, what do you think book publishers can do now to help libraries survive, evolve, and even thrive, other than offer financial incentives, as your survey suggested? Is there anything?
I'm not sure what a good answer to that is. I mean, it would depend on what kind of publisher it is, what they're producing. Are they a small publisher, a big publisher? I think small publishers are in for a more difficult time unless they can find ways to attach themselves either to some sort of aggregated arrangement or partnership that catches the attention of libraries and of library consortia. The bigger publishers seem to be managing, the biggest publishers seem to be managing reasonably well. I'm very frustrated on the consortial front that we are not able to do more with the smaller publishers. The small publishers say to us, well, we come to you, we have offers, we want partnerships, and you just don't have time to talk to us. And I guess the reason for that, to the extent that it's true, is that consortia owe to their members the greatest possible savings and efficiencies for the greatest numbers. And that is always going to come back to the sort of largest producers of information that have already the greatest penetration in our institutions. So somehow, by definition, that starts to leave out small publishers. I'm really interested and encouraged by the activities of these transformational activities that I think is it called Information Power is doing along with Coalition S, in which there is funding to support small societies and small publishers in creating transformational agreements in a leadership mode. So, I would say find a way to become active in these new spaces. An easier way might be to be part of an aggregation like Project Muse, to put your books into Knowledge Unlatched, that kind of thing. Those exist. A harder way might be to track closely some of these transformative agreements for small societies and become active in that. I know they're looking for partners and willing organizations, but this is not easy. And I do think libraries are open to new ideas. So I think when it might be a slow start, but for example, when Knowledge Unlatched came along, over a couple of years, it was possible to build a coalition of libraries that are active in this space. Ditto subscribe to open business models. So I think if we are asked where we want to spend our money and we have a choice, we're going to look in those directions. So make them available to us.
I think that's an interesting point, and Jen basically made the specification here that she said she was referring to small and medium university presses, and I think that's exactly the space that you also spoke to now. Whether I'm not so sure, even though I'm not so sure whether there is really a difference between small commercial publishers and small university presses in how libraries handle them, but you can tell better. But I can for sure say that why many of us have been very insecure in this phase of the pandemic, whether libraries would continue to support open access. I can report from what we are doing at Knowledge Unlatched every day that is the case. So it's really good to see that there is still a strong support for initiatives, and that libraries are not stepping back and basically saying, let's make sure to just secure the large packages of the big publishers, and that's about it. I think that's really a good reaffirming situation for smaller publishers, and I was kind of relieved, obviously, to see that.
Well, I think the large packages may have gone as far as they can go, and now the only direction—
That's also true.
the only direction for them is really to stay where they are and make some adjustments, or to go backwards and start pixelating and not unraveling, but contracting in some way. Whereas I'm hopeful that for the mid-sized to smaller publishers who are at the beginning of this trailhead, the only way to go is forward, unless you want to drop out of the picture. But I don't think that's the case. So I think there may be more opportunities for the small to mid-sized group than for the larger group. We're all looking at those $2 million payments a year to, or $1 million to Elsevier or whatever, and saying, we've got to make room for some other things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, in that context, also a very concrete question from Susan, who is asking, what metrics other than usage are you using now to evaluate collections? So I assume that refers also to the COVID situation. Is there any change in the way how you evaluate collections?
Well, any good collections or former collections librarian would say that, a part of this is science and part of it is art. So there are the usage data with whatever flaws may be built into the way that the data are collected. And, faculty and program demand is really a huge driver on campuses in the US. And it is true that a brand new program that's started to give the university visibility, stellar new hires who make loud and renewed pleas are a big factor. There is the look, and this is also art, at other types of competing resources, if there are any, and what are the best choices to make. So, I don't know that really notionally anything has changed in the sort of overall way that libraries make these choices. And many of them are difficult choices.
Mm-hmm. And I mentioned in the introduction ICALC. If somebody would ask me what are the biggest changes in the scholarly space in the past 5 years, what has changed most, I would say that it's probably a much better coordination among libraries, be it consortia or large library networks in the world. So if you look at Max Planck, JISC, the Dutch consortium, the French consortium, California Digital Library, would you agree with that? Or is it just me waking up in the space of scholarly communications over the last 5 years? Do you think something has qualitatively changed there between 2015 and today?
You mean in the last 5 years?
Yeah.
I'm not so good from anything but a U.S. point of view, and I would say that while we are in the U.S., the North American part of the International Coalition of Library Consortia is not that much different to where we were in the ways we behave now than we were 5 years ago. There are some initiatives that go outside of licensing that have arisen. There are initiatives to do with usage statistics at the consortial level. There are initiatives to share information digitally and in print that grant funding has been gotten, and we're looking at how to do those things better together. So taking ourselves outside of just the licensing arena and looking at the greater range of services and how we can provide for our user base in those has become important. It may be that in Europe, what's become more important is the open access component of that. I think in the US, it's become the wider range of services that can be provided. Even to the point of negotiating cheaper rates with FedEx or UPS for delivery, things like that. So the North American ICALC has really broadened the range of its activities beyond licensing.
Interesting. Here's another question from Jody, coming back to collections. Do you have any recommendations in ensuring collections are also diverse and equitable?
No. No, I mean, this is the recent big topic, especially in the U.S. lately, with all of the anti-racism and all the other stuff that's going on. And you see now seminars on things like decolonization and representing more fairly our authors and our patrons. Quite how this is going to play out, I really don't know.
Okay. That's also fine. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from the audience? If that is not the case, and I would like to thank you very much for joining us today for this very interesting speech. It was extremely enlightening, I think, for the topics and for everybody involved here. And before we are being joined by Peter Brantley in what is it? Not 15, but 22 minutes. I think we should take a quick coffee break. So make yourself comfortable. In Europe, we are like moving slowly into the evening. It's getting dark outside. I hope in the US and for Anne, the sun is up by now. So again, thank you very much. And